Representative Scott, the Armed Services Committee met today to talk about the Department of Defense security cooperation. What came out of that meeting?
Well, one of the things that I would ask people to understand is when we talk about security around the world, if we take Latin America, for example, there are 20 plus countries in Latin America, 600 million people. As we look at our military in the United States, and especially with the funding constraints they're under right now, the best way for us to operate in many of these countries is to build partnerships with them where we help them train and equip their soldiers, and then we can provide the intel and other things. And so it was a meeting about how we take the Colombia model, if you will, and what countries the Colombia model we can apply it to, and what countries we could apply some type of modified Colombia model to. But again, keep in mind as we talk about the world, we have about 1.5 million people in our country that are in uniform, that are serving our country and around the world. Again, 600 million people in Latin America, 20 plus countries. We have to be building these partnerships and coalitions around the world to make sure that we're working together to get rid of organizations like ISIS or ISIL. Not necessarily ISIS with regard to Latin America, but any terrorist organization. Certainly they're working to move throughout the world. So the partnerships that we have throughout the world are something that we're going to continue to expand on. The other partnership that doesn't get talked about a whole lot that we do get a tremendous amount of good from in this country is the partnerships in taking out drugs and the shipments of drugs that are coming into the U.S. If you look at what we've done in Colombia, and if you look at what we do through Central America with the Coast Guard and our Navy and our coalitions, our intel, the JSTARS out of Robins Air Force Base fly those missions tracking the boats that are moving drugs. And so our coalitions and our partnerships don't only deal with terrorism and things along those lines, it's also being used to combat drugs.
Do you agree with leaving 10,000 troops in Afghanistan until the end of 2016? Why or why not, and how will that affect Robins Air Force Base?
Well, first of all, what's happening in that part of the world is unprecedented with regard to the types of evil that we've seen. I personally think that we should have moved faster and more aggressively towards wiping out ISIL before they got their legs underneath them, if you will, and instead the president chose to call them the JV. Anytime you see an organization that is convoyed up and moving and conducting themselves the way they are, the best thing you can do is hit them hard, hit them fast, and get rid of them before they ever get their legs underneath them. So unfortunately now they do have their legs underneath them, and we're going to have to do what it takes and a coalition again with many of the other countries of the world to stay in that part of the world to deal with these people. So the JSTARS platform that flies out of Robins has been a key part of our intelligence gathering throughout not only this mission but all of the missions. We're continuing to work to get the new platform for the JSTARS so that that platform will be able to deliver much more intelligence to our commanders so that they can supply that intel to our troops on the ground. The other thing that you've got is the more the U.S. equipment is being used, the more work there is for the depots. So again, both from an intel and recon platform with the JSTARS as well as from the depot maintenance standpoint, the more action that we're in as the United States, the more work there's going to be at Robins Air Force Base.
The Georgia Department of Labor said about 43% of unemployed have been out of work 27 weeks or more in September of 2015. What are you doing to encourage large and small businesses to hire workers in Georgia, especially long-term unemployed?
Well, let me say this. The number one thing we can do for everybody in this country, including the military, is to get the economy back on track, and that means bringing jobs back to this country. Profit is a good word, and so if a company's not making money, they're not going to be able to stay in your country or in your state and do business. Unfortunately, what we've seen in the last several years is continued rules and regulations that have made it harder to make a profit inside the United States for many of the industries that hired so many people here. If they do make a profit, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. Those two things in combination have driven a tremendous amount of jobs overseas. So we're again working to rein in the regulations that are being passed through the administration. We've done that through appropriation measures and saying that certain rules can't be enforced. But when companies see rules and regulations continuing to change, they become reluctant to hire people, because if they can't put together a business model that shows where they're going to make a profit long term, then they're not going to open businesses in this country. Fortunately for Georgia, Georgia's got a low cost of doing business. We've got great energy supply, that's very good rates on energy. So we're going to continue to work to bring industry into the United States and into Georgia. One of the other things I'll tell you is, as the only Republican on the Armed Services Committee, making sure that we take care of our bases. We have 9 major military installations in the state of Georgia, certainly Robbins being the largest industrial complex in Georgia. And as we take care of those hubs of industry in our economy, our local economy, other businesses will build around them as well.
It was reported that over 130 law enforcement leaders have joined the movement to reduce the nation's incarceration rate. Where do you stand on the issue of mass incarceration? Do you feel like we lock up too many nonviolent drug offenders?
I am absolutely in favor of criminal justice reform. This is one of the areas where there's been a tremendous amount of agreement among conservatives and liberals, and that these long-term sentences for nonviolent criminals are not in anybody's best interest. And so if we have a minor who was arrested, and that person if it was a nonviolent crime, and I mean, really, we need to do what we can to help people who are not a threat to society get back to work. And so I absolutely support criminal justice reform. It's one of the things that I've been somewhat taken back that the president hasn't actually presented a piece of legislation to Congress, when he says that's been one of his mainstays, and he has conservatives and liberals both saying this is an issue that we need to work together on. And quite honestly, I need the president to get off TV and come over to the Capitol and sit down with the members of Congress and start talking about how we move forward with this. And on the areas where we can agree, let's agree and move forward with them. And on the areas where we disagree, we'll just have to disagree on them.
We uncovered families living in subsidized housing even if their household income is $10,000 or more above the limit. What can you do about that?
Well, this has been one of the concerns for a long time with regard to any issues, whether it's housing or food stamps, is making sure that you protect the integrity of the system. And so in protecting the integrity of the system, you're going to have to compare tax returns of the individuals who are receiving the benefits to the benefits that are being received. And certainly if they have been receiving something that they are not by law supposed to receive, then the government has a responsibility to stop that. So again, that gets back to putting the integrity into any of the systems that we do have. And when you don't have integrity, the bottom line is the public loses support for whatever program it may be. So I would suggest to you that getting the integrity back into the programs is important to the long-term future of those programs. Well, we absolutely want the opportunity to read a piece of legislation before we commit to voting for it. And in general, I'll tell you that anything that we do, there has to be access and there has to be integrity. And when you lose the integrity of the system, then at some point you lose the access of the system. I'll give you a perfect example of that. The Earned Income Tax Credit was put in with good intentions to reward people for working. Today it's approximately 30% fraud, where people are filing and actually getting more money back than they put in. That's an example where I think that nobody should get back more than they paid in. If we want to allow low-income working people to receive back the contributions that were made to Social Security on their behalf, I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I would support that, as long as it doesn't take anybody to the point where they receive more money back than they put in. I just don't think anybody should get more back than they put in. Oh, hey, you know, we've got a great state, we've got a great country, and when you look at these things that are going on around the world, Let's be thankful for what we do have. You know, we're gonna we're gonna get this thing back on track, and we're gonna get some jobs coming back to America and get Americans back to work.